listening to the History Things podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit holes of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the History Things podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or online at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Pat and Parker are coming right up. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the show.
The man was all shot through that came today into the barrack square, and a soldier I'm not proud to say that we killed him there. They brought him from the prison hospital, and to see him in that chair, oh Christ, it would call a man to prayer. Maybe I don't understand this thing that makes these rebels die, but all men love freedom and the spring clear in the sky. I wouldn't do this deed again for all that I hold by, as I gaze down my rifle at his but then a soldier for they say he was different, kindly too, apart from all the rest, a lover of the poor, his wounds ill-dressed. He faced us like a man who knew a greater pain than blows or bullets ere the world began. Died he in vain? Ready, present, and him just smiling. Christ, I felt my rifle shake. His wounds all open, around his chair a pool of blood, and I swear his lips said fire before my rifle shot that cursed lead. And I was picked to kill a man like that. James Connolly.
Street where the royal drums did beat, and those loving English feet they walked all over us. And every single night when me dad would come home tired, he'd invite the neighbours out with this chorus. Come out, you black and tans, come out and find me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders.
Oh my God, up the Raw, up the Republic, what's up everybody? Welcome to a very special episode of the History Things podcast. Getting started with a tasty musical vibe there. Opening with a nice poem from Derek Warfield and the young Wolfe Tones. Booming right into some Colm McGuinness. Come out, you black and tans. We're going to get back to Colm McGuinness. You'll hear him again shortly. But somebody you need to hear right now. Sitting to my right is my co-host with the show, the resident ambassador himself, sent all the way down here from the wild, formerly French frontier of Maine. Ladies and gentlemen, say hey, Parker Russell. What's up, buddy? How are you?
Oh, good evening. How are we doing today?
I'm fantastic. I'm very excited to be here for today's episode.
Me
As
too.
you could probably tell, we're going to tell a story that's very exciting, very cool as far as heritage and culture, and we're going to try to do our best to not disrespect the people of my people, as we have been saying on the show here for several years. So what are we here to talk about today, Parker, before we get into it? We're here to talk about the Irish War of Independence between 1919 and 1921. But as always, an official word from our unofficial sponsor.
Diet Moxie, everyone. Here we go. All right, so we're just going to...
Moxie, get some.
Moxie, get some. That's what we're... That's our own personal...
That's why I said the official word from the unofficial sponsor. So I'm having a good pint.
That's excellence.
I'm having a good pint, and Parker's over here drinking sad tree bark.
Well, check this out, though. I have green. Yeah?
Yeah.
Green, white, and orange. That's the...
The tricolor? You just bring out the tricolor today?
That's what I was thinking of.
All right. I'll go with it. We can go with it.
I do my part, you know. I'm just trying to see.
So we did the Easter Rising, 1916, last season with Anthony Trusso, who we lovingly dubbed Anthony McTrusso.
Anthony McTrusso.
And that took us through a very combobulated, uncoordinated attempt at proclaiming the Irish Republic, which, was proclaimed at the onset of what inevitably became the failed uprising of 1916. But that whenever I have this conversation very casually with people, Parker, I always kind of say, like, what is a failure? Because while they technically failed in that exact moment to accomplish the final result of a sovereign state and recognized Republic of Ireland, what they ended up doing, though, was really starting a much, what's the word I'm looking for here? A much more robust and more meaningful attempt at getting that actually accomplished. So what ends up happening is we need to continue that conversation, because everything that occurred in 1916 isn't the end of the story. Irish independence was not won. There were several years of extreme torment, anguish, pain, violence, things like that. And it was all centered with World War I happening in the background, at least for the British Empire. So, Parker, before we get into it, did you do any of the homework I asked you to do? No.
Some of it. I wanted to, but we are entering Hell Week, as we've called it now.
It's true.
We've got a lot of...
we have a lot to do this week.
Yeah.
A lot of recording.
We got a lot going on.
Some filming.
Some filming happening. There's a lot of episodes that are being recorded. What's really funny is...
Fight Club?
Yeah.
Don't talk about
it. Yeah. What's really funny is that the two of us began calling it Fight Week.
Hell Week.
Hell Week. Independently of each other.
That's right.
And then I said it, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm calling it Hell Week too." But
I mean, we looked at the calendar and we were like, "Holy crap!"
Yeah, I did.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I did a little bit of reading, but I actually purposefully want to hear from you. I want to hear a little bit more about this from what I've read, and I'm actually looking forward to actually having a little education here tonight.
All right. Parker, what's your family background? Like, mine's pretty straightforward, right? My name is Patrick McGuire.
Yeah.
I am an American.
Polish, right?
And my family at one point came over here from the Emerald Isle itself. We are a potato famine family, and then the other half came in the aftermath of the 16 Rising, a lot of them first arriving in America during this period when the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War, which, just for the record, we're not going to be covering today. That'll be where our story ends. Next year, Irish Civil War.
This story's going to go until next year.
But
I was a little bit clear my books a little bit. That's like...
But the... so that era is like largely when my family shows up here. So for you, where did the Parker Russells come from?
Well, you're going to like this one. Well, with a name like Parker Russell, you got a lot of English, right? We came over pretty early. I'm pretty much ancestral New England family. Came to Massachusetts on mostly with the Wadsworth side is what I've been able to trace back. But both Russell, the first Russell actually came over with William the Conqueror. It was spelled Rousel, Rousel, and all the Russells, all the different variants of the spelling, they all basically derived from that guy. So we're looking at Norman English since literally William the Conqueror.
All right, but so just to be very clear, I am sitting here with one of the oppressors, one of the bastards of the empire.
You're sitting here with basically, one of the oppressors.
Again, as I said, up the republic. Anyway, all right, well, let's do this. Let's get into our story.
I've got some in there, though. Don't worry. There is some Irish in there. It's more through the Durgans and Cardins and stuff like that. But they're there.
Yeah, as they were for the English. You kind of kept what you wanted.
Yeah.
No, just
that's what we did.
All right, well, let's do this.
Like the Titanic. The Irish built her, the English sunk her.
That's right. That's true. It is your fault, England. The Irish did not get to sail her. We did build you a good ship, Rose. But the
doors just weren't big enough.
The binoculars were MIA. The one pair on a bajillion-dollar ship. So let's get into it, right? I said we were going to listen to Colm McGuinness there one more time. Let's go ahead and have him take us into a little bit of background about the lovely Emerald Isle. Ere, deriving from the name Eru, a goddess of sovereignty in Irish mythology, is the Irish name for the island of Ireland. It is separated from Great Britain to its east by the North Channel, the Irish Sea, and St. George's Channel. Ireland is the second largest island in all of the British Isles, and it is the third largest in Europe, as well as being the 20th largest island in the world. Did you know that, Parker?
I actually didn't know that.
Huge island.
That's pretty big.
Geopolitically, the island is divided between the Republic of Ireland, which is also, just to be very confusing, officially known as Ireland. Even though the name is long form, the Republic of Ireland, it's also officially known as just Ireland.
Just Ireland.
Just Ireland. And it's a sovereign state covering 5/6 of the island, making up 26 of what would be 32 counties, with Northern Ireland existing with the 6 counties still being occupied as part of the United Kingdom. Now, for all of you going through this episode, I am going to be referencing the counties as occupied. That's just how I'm going to do it. We'll get the 6 counties back, lads. Anyway, the modern country of Ireland was created in 1922, 6 years, Parker, after that failed Easter Rising of 1916. Again, comprising of 26 of 32 of Ireland's counties. It was styled as the Irish Free State when it came into creation. And it was the culmination of over 700 years. 700 years, let me say that one more time. Over 700 years in which the Irish people would suffer under the tyranny and persecution, face subjugation and subservience. They would starve and die by the millions. But most importantly, they would fight and resist English rule. They would resist this cruelty, dehumanization, and occupation on its path towards inevitable independence. The Constitution of Ireland, which was adopted in 1937, says that, quote, the name of the state bears the same name as the island as a whole, Ere, or in the English language, Ireland. Now, Section 2 of the Republic of Ireland Act of 1948 states, quote, it is hereby declared that the description of the state shall be the Republic of Ireland. So it's in 1948 when the official Republic of Ireland name, we're no longer the Irish Free State. There's no more conciliatory things. They're just done with the English outright. Now, the state is also informally called the Republic, South or Southern Ireland or the South, especially when distinguishing the state from the island, because, not to be confusing, these 6 occupied counties get called to the north, but when you're talking about Ireland, most Irish people just refer to it as Ireland because they're referencing the island,
not the country.
Not necessarily which country you're in, the Republic or the occupied north.
Makes sense.
So, anyway, by the time of today's story, the wheels of Irish independence have been set in motion long before. England's occupation and dominance of the island, its peoples, and later country of Ireland can be traced, Parker, all the way back to the 10th century. specifically the year 1169, when a group of Norman knights landed in what is now County Wexford. An invasion that was sanctioned by King Henry II of England. You know a little bit about it?
I know a little bit about it. First of all, you said the 10th century?
I don't know. I can't do math.
If it was 1100, that would be the 12th century,
Yeah,
right?
all right, dude. I'll just, fine.
No, I just want to make sure
No,
I'm
you're
right.
probably,
Am I right?
you probably are right.
I think
don't
I'm
know.
right. I think I'm right in this one.
Right, because
I'm right so rarely.
The 18th century is the 1700s.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we're in the 21st century and we're 20s, right? Yeah. But
You're
Henry II, yeah, I love this dude. Well, I don't love him.
Before I
love
get
the story of
into
this dude.
sort of like the invasion itself and setting it up, do you have a tidbit you would like to add about
so
him?
for this is one of my fun little rabbit holes that I like is the some of this British history around this time before they're even Britain, really, they're just English. But Henry II is a very interesting character on the world stage. He's the first what we would call Plantagenet kings. They didn't call themselves Plantagenets really back then. But you might have heard of the Plantagenet era, the Plantagenet dynasty, or the Plantagenet kings of England. He's the first one of those. The name Plantagenet, of course, comes from the flower Plantagenesta.
Is this like War of the Roses stuff?
This is what leads to the War of the Roses, because eventually one of them is not going to have a rightful heir, and it's going to come down to John of Gaunt's granddaughter or something, and then this granddaughter has two. Of course, I mean, they're all still ultimately related, but the Plantagenet era ends in the War of the Roses. See, I told you it's a rabbit hole. I'm not going to do that today. But that is something that I am dying to talk about, though.
All right.
That's something we should definitely talk about. It's a very fascinating period of history.
Putting it on the board.
Not all the dead people, and I know some people are like, oh, you just like talking about dead people. No, it's just kind of fascinating. All the different factions that pop up and disappear and pop up and disappear. And one family's in charge, now the other one. Anyway.
It's an interesting time.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating time. And this is what the legend says. Henry II was eating dinner, and he's receiving reports about Thomas Becket, now Archbishop Becket, and he's receiving all these reports, and he gets mad. And he says one of two different things. One of them is, who will rid me of this turbulent priest? Another one is something about, what is it? Let's see here. What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk?
Wow.
Yeah, so he's very
douchey.
Yeah, douchey, strong words. And what he doesn't know is out in the hallway of the castle are some knights that have just returned from their, they're on crusade in the Holy Land, and they're coming back. The story goes that they're drunk.
Because knights, right?
Right.
They go fight in epic adventures and quests, crusades. They get hammered drunk.
Right. And so they hear this, they hear Henry II just bitching about this guy, and they take this as a challenge. Like, who will rid me of this turbulent priest? Oh, us will. And we'll go to Canterbury. We're going to kick his ass. And then we're going to come back here, and we're going to be
they do
super
more
rewarded.
than kick his ass.
Oh, they do substantially more than kick his ass.
All right, without grossing our audience out, what happens?
I kind of do have to go into some details because it's absolutely macabre. They go into the church, he's there praying, and he kind of has a feeling that they're there to get him. Because, again, he's been very vocal. He's been very anti-Henry II. He's been really, he's been making some waves. So when one of his aides says, hey, some knights are here and they look like they're going to kill you, he's like, I'm just going to sit here and pray. And, he's getting ready. Again, he's taking it very seriously.
I would have ran. It's probably a better option.
No, I mean, he's there at the altar just praying, and the knights come in and they slice him. They slice the top of his head off, and they do terrible things to his brain. They kill him in very grotesque fashion. They wipe the blood off of their sword on his priestly robes, and they walk back, and they said, hey, Kingy, guess what we did?
Because that's how knights are allowed to. It's a perk. They're allowed to address the king that way.
And Henry II is like, what the actual did you do?
Right.
And he was like, whoa. And, of course, the Pope issues sanctions. But this is something that lasts with Henry II's legacy that he never fully lives down, as you could imagine. Like, once you kind of oversee and once you're blamed for this murder inside of a church, which is kind of seen as a house of refuge, even in these early times. But he did a lot of other things, too. Like, he established a lot of, circuit riding court judges.
Yeah.
You know, you could now, under King Henry II, you could now get the king's justice by one of his appointed courts. So we have today in our more modern court system, we've adopted something that Henry II kind of set up.
So if you're Irish, King Henry II is what got started 700, almost 800 years of persecution.
Yeah.
So some of his motives for invading Ireland have been proven and simultaneously speculated, because documentation from that far back is very difficult to research. That the English Pope, Hadrian IV, had given him the title of Lord of Ireland, so he perhaps felt like he needed to validate his title. He wanted to reform the Irish church. This one's pretty locked. He wanted to bring it more in line with the English church, which at this time is not the Church of England. This is, in fact, still the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
The Church of England is a moment that comes about 400 years later.
Yeah, I was going to say about Henry VIII.
When Henry VIII breaks away from the Catholic Church to officially form the Church of England and start the English Reformation. Right. So he definitely wants to reform the Irish church, and he's perhaps just feeling the need to validate a given title. But essentially in 1169, he's going to sanction a small group of Norman knights to land in what is now County Wexford. Mm-hmm. And after they sack the town, they remain and essentially colonized to ensure an English foothold on the land.
Why do you call these people oppressors, Pat? I don't understand it. They show up and sack a place?
That's right. The first thing they do is burn out people's homes. 2 years later, in 1871, Henry II lands an even larger army in Waterford to accomplish, ready for this? The same objective. Burn them out and claim the land for yourself.
Wasn't there for the crystal?
Following year, 1172, Henry II took Dublin by force, and fearing total annihilation, the Irish kings and bishops essentially just bowed and swore fealty to this new English monarch. Thus, in 1172, the island of Ireland has now come under the heel of England.
What was Ireland's government like prior to that time? Was it just like its own kingship, its own...
Yeah, I mean, it was essentially a feudal system. You had lords and noblemen and people living in their own tiny little fiefdoms. Like my family, the McGuires, are from the north, so one of the occupied six.
Okay.
They are from County Fermanagh, which for a long time was ran by the McGuire clan. It was essentially a kingdom, right? But
was it a podcasting kingdom?
It would be today.
It would be today, yes.
So here's one of the things that grinds my gears, so to speak, about the way, especially a lot of Americans talk about their Irish heritage. They're always like, yeah, well, I'm related to this Irish king. And they always equate the title of king to the same level of sovereignty that, say, like, more famous kings of the past. King Henry VIII, King George III, right? King Charles now. King of these little places in Ireland at the time equates more to like what a county councilor would be, county executive.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for. For like the county you live in today in America. There's still a governor, there's still senator, there's all this stuff, but you know, locally in this municipality, they have some legislative power. Now, to be very clear, in this era that I'm talking about with Ireland, like when the McGuires are claiming a kingship to Fermanagh and stuff, they have what we would recognize as that sort of sovereign absolute rule, but its boundaries are like a neighborhood.
Right.
You know, it's like a county the size. So it's like you got a bunch of kingdoms on Ireland at the time.
Right. Well, I mean, so my wife's maiden name is Ryan, and Ryan means little king.
Right.
And apparently there's this county, and of course I apologize to everyone. I can't remember what this county is, but my wife was doing some research on her family history, and she ran into somebody who's like, the Ryans, like, they're in this town, and everyone there is named Ryan. Congratulations, you know.
Yeah.
Like that's literally everybody there is the little king.
SNL, Saturday Night Live, has a great skit about Americans coming to Ireland and how they expect the Irish to react to it. We'll link it in the comments. You know, as somebody who's very proud of my Irish heritage, you know, one of the first things I learned in actually researching it was like, temper yourselves, like be proud of it. But when you do make it to the old country,
right,
just remember you're an American, and they don't care that your family during the famine, during the blight, or during whatever.
Yeah.
But it is a beautiful culture, and at one point in time, the McGuires were and I think still remain a very prominent family in County Fermanagh. But so essentially, it's all these people, though, in this moment in 1172 are like, so I'm king here, but like I now have a king.
Right.
Because they're scared because these Norman knights have just landed and been like, you're done.
Right.
So 700, almost 800 years of oppression begins. Now,
Actually, you mentioned Norman. I don't even think actually Henry II. He might not have even spoke English. He was from France. He was from present day France. I don't believe that
wouldn't be the first English monarch to not speak the language.
Well, he might have been actually the first one.
Oh, like technically?
I think he might technically have been, because he was again, he's a Plantagenet, and he's from Anjou, I believe. If my British historian folks, please, I won't begrudge you if you correct me on that, but I don't believe I don't think he spoke a word of English. He was Norman French. He was a lot like William the Conqueror, and kind of in that sense. Maybe William was first. I don't know. It could be.
Well, let's talk about some of the results of this invasion.
Yeah,
here.
please.
So the results of the invasion. The invasion leads to the creation of what is known as the Lordship of Ireland, which is a part of Henry's Angevin Empire, I guess you could call it. Angevin Empire. Thank you for that. The Normans established a significant colony in Dublin, slowly gained control over the rest of the Irish territory, and this period of Irish history is known as the Anglo-Norman period.
Yep. Angevin Anjou is where that's Angevin Empire. Yep.
So colonists followed the conquerors, right? So I said right away, like, this wasn't just an army setting up shop. They brought people to stay, and they settled across the land, especially in places like the provinces of Munster and Ulster, which are the southern and northernmost provinces, if you're looking at the map of Ireland, respectively. By the 18th century, nearly a third of the island's population was from immigrant stock, descending basically from 350,000 mostly Protestant settlers who had colonized Ireland during the course of the 17th century. So that's
1600s.
The 1600s is a big time for the English to show up.
This would be during Elizabeth I, right?
I'd have to consult, who is it, Gwyneth Paltrow? No, not Gwyneth Paltrow. Kate Blanchett played her.
Yes, that's right.
Fantastic movies. The colonists are going to bring with them their English language, fashions, and culture, and commercial ways which parliamentary legislation privileged while outlawing. We came to your land, now your language is outlawed. The way you dress is outlawed. The way you farm, the way you get together and do things basically socially and politically are all now illegal.
And the Indian Bureau of our country, who did this in the 1800s to some success.
Totally different. It's
totally different. They took the whole Cherokee Nation.
So sectarianism, cultural stereotyping, dehumanization, and expropriation underpinned early modern English imperialism.
We skipped over, this is my island.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
By the way, Henry II is actually before Longshanks.
Oh, yeah.
Just so you know. Just timeline for audience.
Yeah, we're 200 years before Braveheart. So
100.
Dude.
100 and something.
People don't listen to this show for math. All right.
Words mean things, Pat.
But numbers don't, unless you're a NASA rocket scientist nerd. It's not true. I'm just very bad at it, so my defense mechanism is to make fun of everybody who's spectacular at it.
I'm not spectacular at it. I just kind of know the general. I think we're talking about 1200s.
It's really
Walls,
jealousy.
right?
No, he's late 1200s, early 1300s. I think Robert the Bruce is doing stuff between 1301 and 1314.
Okay. Point taken.
Pretty sure, though.
Yeah, probably closer to 200. I apologize.
As in the Ottoman and Russian empires, imperialism in Ireland ultimately rested on violence and the use of force. During the 9 Years' War between 1594 and 1603, 9 years, English forces used scorched earth tactics and starvation to secure their submission. Roughly 20% of the Irish population died during the War of the 1640s alone. So essentially the 17th century gets started with a huge waylaying of the Irish population.
That's right.
Massive reduction. Large numbers of non-combatants suffered death from war, exposure, famine, disease, along with hostage taking and dislocation, meaning they were just, you can't go home because it's mine now, or it's burned. Refugees, the majority of whom were women and children, overran Dublin and other urban centers. Yeah. Eyewitness accounts from the 1641 depositions recorded the brutal assaults, stripping, torture, rape, and reproductive violations inflicted on women during this period. Politicians and propagandists from the 17th all the way until the 20th centuries then seized upon their trauma and suffering to instill further fear, to stir up more sectarianism, and to justify retribution.
And this is Cromwell, right?
We're about to be there.
Okay.
The revolution in Irish landholding, which began with the plantations of the early 17th century and culminated with the Cromwellian and later restoration of land settlements, resulted in the wholesale transfer of land of roughly 8 million acres from Catholic to Protestant hands. So this is going to be the spine, the dividing line of a lot of this conversation, the theme of a lot of Ireland's pain and suffering and everything is going to be the division between Catholics and Protestants.
Right.
That is still the relevant defining factor between the 6 occupied counties and the 26 of the South.
Yeah. It's a very interesting time, even in the New World. The New World is seeing a little bit of this during this kind of colonization period. The end of the 1600s and into the early 1700s. In New England, I'm gonna talk about what we call New England.
We can do it here in Maryland too.
Yep. I'm gonna speak to the history branch that I'm more familiar with, and that is if Protestantism kind of didn't win, probably today we would call New England New France, right? And that is because basically England won those wars, and along with it, there was a lot of Catholicism. I guess I'm saying there was a lot of Catholicism in areas like Castine, Maine, which we've mentioned on our show before. I grew up not too far from there. Kind of big in the Jesuit kind of order. So yeah, a lot of the countries that came here to that region first, and I don't necessarily mean the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I'm talking about all the other colonies around it. They were French, they were Dutch, they were much more Catholic than the English were.
Well, what we broadcast from the state of Maryland today.
Right.
Founded, I guess, was granted as a charter in 1632. People land here in 1634. The Calvert family, Catholic family,
right,
and the British aristocracy at the time is granted this, in a very loose way, what essentially permission to create what will become a Catholic safe haven over here in the New World. Now, by the end of the 17th century, by the end of the 16th century, that has largely faded away.
I think you're right, 17.
The Catholic sort of protections that were in place in the colony of Maryland are gone. The Catholic power players are gone.
Yep.
The Protestants kind of just decided, nope, we're going to take back everything. And this wasn't just happening in Ireland, like you said, happening in the American colonies. So try to imagine the British Empire for what it is. It is a global network, and all parts of its network experience, while they have these tremendously unique experiences, experience a lot of the same shared experiences, such as this Protestant power grab.
Yep. It's interesting because, of course, we hear a lot, and it is true, that the Pilgrims left their country for religious freedom. That's a true experience across the board because the Catholics and Irish are being run out.
You're wrong.
Places.
You're wrong. They came to
that?
America to have Thanksgiving dinner.
Yes.
I was taught that.
I'm sorry, Pat. I take everything back.
And the Indians showed them how to make corn.
You put a fish in it.
They call maize.
You put a fish in the dirt.
And then everything was fine after that. That's what they teach us.
Yeah, that's right. And Columbus definitely discovered America, too.
This is way after Columbus discovered America.
Well, look, Columbus discovered America, then George Washington.
Hey, real quick.
And that's it. That's all you need to know.
I'm going to talk about Columbus real fast. So,
oh, good. Can I take a break?
Well, obviously.
Can I go away and never come back?
Obviously, Columbus doesn't actually discover America. Basically, we end up with Amerigo Vespucci discovers, as far as Europeans are discovery are concerned, most of the Americas. That's why they all have his name, America.
Yeah.
So, fun fact. So, when you beach your landing ships, you don't just hop right off, right? You usually have your peons jump out and pull your
Europeans in this case?
Oh, yeah, that's right. But they usually pull the boat to shore, right? So you get into the shallows and you have, like a landing crew. You jump out, they pull a rope, they pull the boat in type of thing. Technically, on Amerigo Vespucci's North American expedition, the first feet to ever touch this soil that were not indigenous was a sailor named Patrick McGuire.
Are you serious?
Hell yeah, I would be serious.
Look,
Listen, would I ever tell you a yarn?
Look, I have a theory for years.
Would I tell you a yarn
Yes.
here on this show?
Yes. Well, I have a theory for years that Pat
true.
McGuire is a vampire. That's
I'm
the
not
theory.
saying it was me.
It was you. You were a vampire. That's it. I've seen your tombstone.
You're right.
That you're allegedly buried in, but you're not.
I did die at the Battle of Monocacy.
I've been there.
I actually survived. I died the day after. I died on the 10th.
Yeah, you died on the 10th of July.
Put some respect on my name.
Yeah. No, it's weird, man. You've been everywhere. You're like Johnny Cash, only of history.
I'm just saying, that's a pretty cool name to
Are you
have.
serious?
Yeah.
That's a real fact?
I'm pretty sure I remember that being a real fact.
Wow. Okay, so Patrick McGuire.
That's worth fact-checking, but I'm pretty
Amerigo
sure.
Vespucci, who's like, what, Portuguese?
I don't know.
He's sailing around with somebody named Patrick McGuire?
Haven't you learned anything about sailing? Sailing is like one of the most inclusive communities ever.
I know, but that's
Minus
just,
women. They didn't want women on ships for a long time.
Right.
But like in an era where we had slavery and things like that, it was, if you were willing to stick your neck out on these rinky-dink boats, which...
I'm just picturing you sailing around with Amerigo Vespucci at this point.
Hell yeah, dude. We were
That would be
throwing
great.
back Powers whiskey. That's why I had to get out. He couldn't handle it.
That is amazing.
So getting back to this land transfer thing. So moreover, Irish land, together with the access to now Irish labor, essentially, we took all the land that these guys were farming. They still need to farm it, even though they don't own the land now.
Yeah.
This essentially funds English imperialism in Ireland and beyond, and provisioned other colonies, especially in the Atlantic and India. So the British essentially have turned Ireland into this engine, this science experiment of how to do things, implement things, and then spread them to the rest of the empire. By the end of the 17th century, Ireland was well and truly embedded as a subservient economic structure, something that especially characterized the later British Empire. So in this and so many other ways, Ireland served, as I said, as a laboratory for the British Empire. It was in Ireland that imperial and Anglicizing policies were formulated and implemented before they were spread across the rest of Europe and across the rest of the empire. Race-based ideologies were developed as tools of the empire, including things such as mapping, which I'm not really sure about that. But these things were all tested across the empire eventually, but first on the island of Ireland.
Okay.
Now, in the last decades of the 18th century, so 1700s, the British Crown in Ireland faced growing demands for constitutional reform. The Protestant ascendancy had relaxed the penal laws by which, in the wake of the Jacobite defeat in 1691, had sought to break the power and reduce the influence both of the Catholic Church and the remaining Catholic gentry. So back when we were erasing all this stuff, they didn't get all of it. But now they're trying to get the rest. But the landed Anglican interests continued to monopolize the Irish Parliament, occupying the House of Lords, and through the system of pocket bureaus, half of the House of Commons as well. The interests of the Crown were meanwhile secured by a viceregal administration accountable not to the legislature in Dublin, but to the king and his ministers in London, and which also having boroughs in its pockets reduced to a third the number of common seats open in an electoral contest. So essentially they are just limiting the Irish ability to gain power, gain a foothold. They're just trying to reduce everything. Now, additionally, the British Parliament presumed the right to itself to legislate for Ireland. So it's not just about reducing. They're also saying, not only are you guys not able to do anything, we're the only ones allowed to do things. And they exercise this prerogative essentially to restrict rival Irish trade and commerce. So they essentially just blocked Ireland from existing alongside the rest of the world, even though it has a population that's developing. I mean, you can't control all the ports, so Ireland remains connected to everything, but England is really trying to just go, but you're ours. You're like our little special thing, and you only play with us.
How expansive had the British Empire become at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we are global.
Like,
by the end of the 18th century.
They've got us at this point.
No, by the end of the 18th century, they've lost us.
Well, I'm sorry.
They've got Canada. But if you think about it, where they were, let's just say right before the War of Independence for America ends, they've got the colonies in the Americas, Canada. They've got Australia. They've got
Jamaica,
India. They have presence in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Dude, they are in Africa, I think, at this point.
That we're full-blown
hardcore
into imperial. So most of the places, I think they have India at this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't most of the places that are under European rule, don't they have like, or under English rule specifically, they're not being controlled as harshly as Ireland is being controlled, it seems like.
Yes, yes and no.
I mean, there are some, but it seems like Ireland is just receiving
Well,
extra
here's why.
hard.
Here's why. Right now, if I wanted to punch Joe Schmagegi or you, who's easier for me to hit?
Me.
Right, because you're right here. Joe
Right.
Schmagegi's not even in this room.
Right.
So Ireland is like conveniently just tucked.
I
right
also have a very punchable face, I'm told.
That's right. Just change your face. But Ireland is literally just right across the channel, so they are. I mean, they're easy to touch. India much harder, like things
True.
like that. The
True.
colonies here in America much harder.
And just for the record, that was not to say that no other colony was experiencing oppression. They absolutely were experiencing oppression during this time. I was just simply saying that it seems like Ireland was getting more of the brunt.
Yeah, because at this point, dude, not just because of proximity, but because also the time invested in it,
right?
In terms of persecution and subjugation, the English have just more or less wrapped up Ireland into this little English ball of crap.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like Ireland, like the people of Ireland are suffering tremendously, and the point I'm getting to is because by the end of the 18th century, the seeds of breaking away are starting to grow. The pot of water of rebellion is beginning to boil over. Think of whatever analogy you want, but we get to 1798, and one of the first rebellion attempts is going to happen. Now, let's talk about the beginnings of that revolution. So the revolt in the North American colonies, meaning the American War of Independence, presented a challenge. War with the colonists and with their French allies drew down the British Crown's regular forces in Ireland tremendously. And in their absence, volunteer companies of loyalists were formed to maintain British order in Ireland. However, like their kinsmen in the American colonies, many sons of Ireland that had enlisted in these companies found themselves also debating the merits of freedom and asserting their, quote, you ready for this one? Constitutional rights.
Were they fighting for their rats?
Their rats. So in 1782, right before the Treaty of Paris is signed and the American nation is proclaimed official, in 1782, with the volunteers drilling and parading in sort of an otherwise beleaguered patriot opposition in the Irish Parliament, Westminster, so back in London, Westminster repealed its Dependency of Ireland Act on Great Britain, which was a 1719 act. Now, you might ask yourself, you might not.
I asked myself a lot of questions.
What was the act of 1719?
What was the act of 1719?
Great question, Parker. An act for the better securing the dependency of the Kingdom of Ireland on the Crown of Great Britain. I'm going to read that again. An act for better securing the dependency of the Kingdom of Ireland on the Crown of Great Britain.
Kingdom of Ireland.
But the point of this is to make it more dependent on us. To put that boot heel down harder. It was a 1719 act passed by the British Parliament, which declared that it had the right to pass laws for the Kingdom of Ireland and that the British House of Lords had appellate jurisdiction for Irish court cases, meaning any appeals from an Irish-based trial or court were to be heard and decided by a British court.
So let me guess, in traditional British fashion, that mean you had to go see a British judge.
Yeah.
And there probably weren't many hanging around.
And if they were, they didn't care about you because they
just cared about the crown.
And they looked down on everything Irish at this time. So.
I have a really stupid question that maybe I don't know. Maybe I should know this. Maybe there is no answer. Why did they call it the Kingdom of Ireland? There was no king of Ireland at that time.
There was a high king. And in fact, the Maguires at one point sat, and one of the most high and powerful of these high kings was a Maguire who sat in this throne. His name was Hugh Maguire.
And did he sail with Amerigo Vespucci?
No, he did not. In fact, actually, I think he got messed up. We're going to come to him at one point.
Okay.
Not a secret. If you've been with us for a long time on this show, I haven't spent a lot of time in my own family history. That has changed in recent months as my children have grown and begun asking more questions about.
Sure. Yeah, it works that way,
our
right?
extended culture and things like that. So I've gotten into it, which is why I've learned as much as I've learned about the Maguires outside of the United States. But yeah, so there is a high king. There is, we have, again, think about it. You have all these county council kings, and then you have a governor king.
So basically it's like a king. Is he the high king? And I don't mean to disrespect.
In Ireland, he would be the bee's knees.
Okay, but so he would not be like a puppet king, or would he be like a puppet king?
No, and at times some of them were puppet kings, some of them were not. But
So this is more what I picture in my head right now is kind of like the congressperson we have from the District of Columbia who can go and sit in Congress but can't vote. The reason why I'm thinking that is because of the way the boot heel has been brought down on Ireland and the rights would just be stripped away. I'm assuming no king of their own country would be like, bro, yeah, come abuse us some more, you know?
You know, that's something we're going to have to come back to because I don't know the direct answer for how much power, voice they actually have.
Okay.
I know it exists.
Like I said, I didn't know if it was a stupid question or not, so I just don't know.
Just for the record, as both an American of Irish descent and a New York Yankees fan, I do recognize that I get to lay claim to some of the douchiest brags, right? Like, you know, but you'll never hear me make them. Like, if we ever talk baseball and we get into that argument sense, you're never going to hear me be like, we've won 27 championships, bro. I hate that argument. And you're never going to hear me be like, well, my family, we're kings of all of Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I can't stand when people do that. But
Yeah.
technically, at one point.
Yeah. Well, hey, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It was all
Maybe
me.
you could go there one day and you could take your claim, and I could co-host Ireland with you.
So funny story to that, there is a local guy who I think has now formally let it all go, but there was a local Frederick County man who was the legitimate heir to the Kingdom of the Isle of Man, was even at one point legitimately recognized by the Queen of England. He got a TV show, a TLC show, all this stuff.
I've heard about this guy.
But he went over there, you know, not necessarily to take over the government, but to kind of make himself known. And the Manx people were like, who the cares about you? They did not care at all. So one thing I definitely will not be doing is going over to Ireland and being like, hey, so my name's McGuire.
Maybe,
Put
just
some respect
maybe.
on it.
Right, just maybe.
I'll
And
never
hear me
do
out
that.
here.
I will
mean,
never
this is-
do that.
I might be reaching a little bit, but maybe the Irish people are just sick of kings.
Maybe. Well, maybe they're waiting for the one true one to return.
The Eye of Pat turns
That's
to
right.
Gondor.
I will never do that. So Section 1 of the 1719 Act noted that the Irish House of Lords had recently, quote, assumed to themselves a power and jurisdiction to examine, correct, and amend judgments of the Irish court, which it held to be illegal. As such, it declared that the Kingdom of Ireland was subordinate to and dependent on the British Crown, and that the King, with the advice and consent of the Parliament of Great Britain, had, quote, full power and authority to make laws and statutes of sufficient validity to bind the kingdom and people of Ireland. Section 2 declared that the House of Lords of Ireland had no jurisdiction to judge, affirm, or reverse any judgment, sentence, or decree made in any court within the Kingdom of Ireland, and that all proceedings before the House upon any such matter were declared to be null and void to all intents and purposes whatsoever. Essentially, the Irish House of Lords, you shouldn't even meet. You have no power to do anything. That's what this act said. It became known as the Declaratory Act, and opponents in the Irish Patriot Party referred to it as the 6th of George I, meaning they named it after the regnal year in which it was passed. So George I had only been on the throne for 6 years.
Okay.
Legend and political historians have also called it the Dependency of Ireland on Great Britain Act of 1719, or just the Irish Parliament Act of 1719. Now, this was all prompted by a routine Irish lawsuit. There was the act was aimed at resolving the long-running dispute between the British and the Irish House of Lords as to who had the final say from the Court of Appeal of Irish courts. So, I'm going to get this name wrong. I'm going to do this a lot with the Gaeilge language, the Irish language, things like that. But along with Poyning's law, the Declaratory Act became a symbol of subservience of the Parliament of Ireland to the one in England, and its repeal was long an aim of Irish statesmen, a goal which was met for Anglican Irish interests, at least, as part of the Constitution of 1782. But the question of whether and on what terms parliamentary reform should embrace Catholic emancipation created much tension in the government and at home. But for the moment, the ancient regime, survived. The Anglican aristocracy remained entrenched in Ireland under the patronage of a government that continued to take its direction, Parker, from London. So Ireland is now fully under the boot heel. The English are fully driving the old ship there, and they basically dictated how the Irish government will work, or rather, not work.
Absolutely wild.
Wild, right?
I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, we're Americans who are talking about this, and we go around the world, as we're very proud to do.
Making our own empire.
Yeah, but our show goes around, and we're sitting here in a country that right now, I hear stories like this, and it just kind of, I am thankful that we have, our own constitution that protects us from.
For now.
Yep.
So
we have our own protection, at least for now. For these guys couldn't meet, they couldn't talk. We're two assholes who can sit here and say whatever we want in our studio, and these guys live in a country at this time. And I know things have changed, but it's just really interesting to think about. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir for a lot of folks.
So here's
here,
the analogy. Here's the analogy.
Really crazy.
Somebody else moves into your house without your permission.
Yep.
And then literally decides how you run your house.
Yep.
And anytime you protest, whatever, try to do something about it, you're stopped. You're shut down, either through military force or political force. But essentially, in your own home, somebody else is in charge of everything.
Yep. It's crazy.
In early 1798, a series of violent attacks are going to occur on magistrates in County Tipperary, County Kildare, and in Kings County. They're going to boil over into an attempt to throw off English rule in Ireland outright. A faction of the United Irish Leadership, a sworn association formed in the wake of the French Revolution, so one of those ripple effects of the late 18th century when almost everybody was rebelling. It was intended to secure a representative government of Ireland. It was led by Lord Edward Fitzgerald and Arthur O'Connor, and they felt they were sufficiently well and organized and equipped to begin an insurgency. However, the British government was made aware of these movements and in response implemented martial law, suspended habeas corpus, and began a mass seizure of lands and arrests of the suspected leaders of this suspected leaders and organizers of this movement. With the conspiracy flushed out into the open, the cohesive movement to throw off British rule quickly began to crumble. So we had a lot of movement to get it going, but as you'll see, this will be a theme through Irish rebellion attempts. They're not very organized.
Yeah.
Beginning in late...
Well, it's hard to organize, right?
Sure. And the lack of organization is largely what does them in.
And you know what? It's almost like they know that. It's almost like the British know that. It's almost like if we separate them and we don't allow them to have freedoms,
right,
then they'll be less likely to succeed.
So beginning in May, late May, I should say, of 1798, there were a series of uncoordinated risings in the county of Carlow and Wexford in the southeast, where rebels were met with some success. However, in the north, around Belfast in counties Antrim and Down, and closer to the capital of Ireland, Dublin, also in counties Meath and Kildare, the British response was stifling, and quickly they put down many of these Irish uprisings. In late August of 1798, after the rebels had been reduced to pockets of guerrilla resistance, the French, an ally that Ireland had appealed to for assistance for quite some time, finally landed an expeditionary force in the west in County Mayo. So, England's old enemy has now shown up. Right? Catholic Ireland went to Catholic France and said, hey, these English jabronis, and look, it's gonna, and I'll cover it here, but essentially it takes some time for the French to get moving. So,
and this is 1798.
1798.
So this is after, obviously after the French Indian War, after the American War for Independence, and after French Revolution.
And Louis and Marie Antoinette are gone. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So this is Napoleon.
Yeah.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, and if not directly, right about to be Napoleon. So. The French land in the West. They land in County Mayo in August of 1798. However, this saving the day appearance is going to fade quickly when the French force is basically unable to effect a conjunction with a significant rebel force. They can't find any of the Irish, like the Irish rebels. I mean, they're there. They're marching around the countryside, but they don't find any large body of troops to kind of form into a bigger thing. So, on September 9th, 1798, after failing to find an Irish force to link up with, the French are absolutely dismantled by the British in a series of running engagements. And in the last open field fighting of the rebellion, the local men that had rallied on the French arrival were routed at Killala on September 23rd, 1798. But then on October 12th, 1798, a second French expedition was defeated in a naval action off the coast of County Donegal, leading to the capture of the United Irish leader Wolfe Tone. So
Best name ever.
So if a lot of you music
Wolfe
fans
Tone.
and a lot of you laymen have been attempting to access your Irish heritage and have come across the music of the Wolfe Tones, it's named for this guy.
Nice.
And effectively ending the rebellion of 1798. So Wolfe Tone is subsequently sentenced to be hanged, but he reportedly dies of a self-inflicted wound. So just for a moment, I didn't even put this in my notes, but they find him essentially kind of cut and stabbed, but it's gray as to whether he did it to himself or not. So it's officially put in as a self-unaliving.
Control, delete.
But there's enough gray to the situation to be like, is this actually what happened? So we'll never know.
That's interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
In the wake of the rebellion, the British Parliament implemented the Acts of Union, which abolished the Irish legislature outright and brought Ireland under the crown of the United Kingdom officially through the Parliament at Westminster.
So this was all unofficial up to here?
I mean, this was all just Ireland is its own thing off on the side, and Great Britain is its own thing.
Wow.
The United Kingdom is its own thing of just Scotland and...
So they're just doing this unofficially. Like, we're just going to crush you unofficially.
Well, they're doing it officially, but they didn't bring Ireland into the United Kingdom, which it is now doing.
Well, okay. So now, foreshadowing alert. Does this mean that they're going to have like all the rights of like a normal United Kingdom citizen?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Oh.
So...
Worse than the Roman Empire, folks.
So the centenary of the rebellion in 1898 is actually going to see the legacy of the 1798 rebellion disputed by nationalists who had wished to restore the legislature in Dublin. Republicans invoked the name of Wolfe Tone in the cause of complete separation and independence, and by Unionists opposing all measures of Irish self-government. So much like George Washington, by the time of the American Civil War, where the North and the South are both trying to use his symbolism to their advantage, you have Republicans, patriots, Unionists, everybody together kind of trying to claim what 1798 actually meant for Ireland's legacy. But essentially, it's in that moment where the British say, we're done messing around. Now you're a part of the United Kingdom. Now get in line and shut up.
Yep.
Now, almost immediately in the wake of the failed rising of 1798, home rule and independence were again on the minds of Ireland and its people. They were like, we need that. Like, we need to be free.
Sure.
So the 19th century, however, though, is going to see almost no progress made towards that autonomy or independence. The 1800s, in fact, are only going to bring more pain and hardship to the Emerald Isle. The first few decades of the century are going to pass with a slow but very consistent continuation and expansion of British authority and oppression. However, things would be made infinitely worse with the arrival of the Great Famine, which lasted from 1845 to 1852. This is a time when Ireland's population declined dramatically due to more than 1 million Irish citizens dying of starvation and disease, as well as an additional 1.5 million who chose to emigrate primarily to the United States.
Sure.
Enter the McGuires in the United States.
There you go.
Now, the famine and its effects permanently changed the island demographically, politically, as well as its cultural landscape, producing an estimated, as I said, more than 2 million refugees and spurring a century-long population decline. An already strained relationship between many Irish people and the then-ruling British government worsened. English documentary filmmaker John Percival said that the famine, quote, became part of the long story of betrayal and exploitation which led to the growing movement in Ireland for independence. Now, Parker.
Yeah.
You ready to talk about something that sounds a little more familiar, maybe?
Maybe.
All right,
a little
let's
bit.
talk about Young Ireland. Let's talk about the Young Ireland Rebellion. In 1848, or should I say 1848, would be another momentous year towards independence in Ireland. However, Ireland would not be the only country attempting to forge its sovereign existence in Europe. Much like 1790s were a very tumultuous time, the 1780s and 90s were kind of a revolutionary era, kind of happening globally for empires. Here we are in 1848, once again seeing a kind of global movement for the oppressed to achieve their own sovereignty and independence.
Okay.
The revolutions of 1848, known in some countries as the Springtime of the Peoples or the Springtime of Nations, was a series of revolutions throughout Europe over the course of more than 1 year, from 1848 to 49, and it remains the most widespread revolutionary wave in European history to this date, even including the ones in the twilight of World War I and just after that. Okay. So essentially everybody in Europe who was oppressed and able to do something about it in 1848 was attempting to do something about it.
Right.
The revolutions were essentially dramatic and liberal in nature, with the aim of removing the old monarchical?
I think that's
right. Monarchical structures and creating independent nation states as envisioned by romantic nationalism. The revolution spread across Europe after an initial revolution had began in Italy in January 1848. Eventually, over 50 countries were affected or participated, but no significant coordination or cooperation amongst these nations or respective revolutionaries amounted to much change of the geopolitical situation at the time.
And this is during Victoria. Victoria's reign in Britain.
She has come to power at this point.
So you're solidly into full-on Victorian era imperialism, Empress of India, all that stuff.
All right. So some of the major contributing factors for these movements were widespread dissatisfaction with political leadership, demands for more participation in government and democracy, demands for freedom of the press. Sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. Other demands made by the working class were for economic rights, the upsurge of nationalism, and the European potato failure, which triggered mass starvation, migration, and civil unrest. So that's the famine and things like that.
Okay.
Now, to be very clear, we're not going to get into the famine itself, but it does get commonly known as the potato famine. It's not exclusively a potato famine problem. There's a lot of other contributing factors to food and supplies of food being shipped to places and not allowed into places. So it's not just, the potatoes were bad, and so the Irish died.
It wasn't like, no French fries, got to go to America.
You're right. But that is how we came over here, Parker.
Yes.
We said, the scampi fries cannot be had. It's 1849, and we've just had 5 years, 6 years.
Are you saying that Orida is like Irish? Oh, Rida?
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
But maybe it is.
Maybe it is.
Is it Orida?
It is.
Okay.
Oh, it stands for Oregon, Idaho.
Well, then why did you try to set me up there?
That was just fun.
You tried to set me up.
No, get it?
Your English oppression is still trying to set me up.
It's in my blood. What can I say?
Bastard.
It's just something that we do.
All right. So, 1848, revolutions happening everywhere. None of them really successful. Many of these revolutions are quickly suppressed as tens of thousands of people are inevitably killed, and even more are forced into exile. Significant lasting reforms include the abolition of serfdom in Austria and Hungary, the end of absolute monarchy in Denmark, and the introduction of a representative democracy in the Netherlands. The revolutions were most important in France, the Netherlands, Italy, the Austrian Empire, and the states of the German Confederation that would make up the German Empire in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So as Germany goes from this confederation of states to this nation of Germany as the Treaty of Paris, I believe, 1871, or maybe Treaty of Versailles. Versailles, Paris, pick one. So you'll see that this is where the biggest effects, positive effects, will be made.
Was the potato famine, like, I know it's in Ireland, obviously, but did England really, like, see much of this, much of the result of this?
A lot of Europe saw this famine. I mean, it's just, a lot of Europe isn't being basically isolated and
isolated. Yeah. Like,
isolated is probably the best word
oppressed
by England. I mean, the English at large points are not allowing food shipments through the ports.
It's irritating.
So in Ireland, so let's go back to, we're talking about Ireland here. So in 1848, Ireland is one of these many revolutions. An Irish nationalist uprising led by the Young Ireland movement took place on July 29th, 1848, just outside of the village of Ballingarry in South Tipperary. After being chased by a force of young islanders and their supporters, an Irish constabulary unit basically meaning the police, took refuge in a house and held those inside as hostages. A several-hour gunfight will follow, but the rebels are going to eventually flee after a large number of police reinforcements arrive. And that's essentially the end of the Rising of 48. Now, after the collapse of the rebellion, its leaders were either arrested or scattered, and those who were arrested were sent to places in the empire such as Bermuda and Australia to serve in labor camps and on royal dockyards. Those who escaped continued to plot to overthrow British rule in Ireland and later founded an organization known as the Fenian Brotherhood. Parker, I led this section off with, are you ready to talk about something a little more familiar?
Yes.
Some of the leaders of this rebellion, a couple names might be familiar to you.
Okay.
One is definitely going to be familiar to you.
All right.
And that's going to be both Thomas Francis Marr and John Mitchell, leaders of the movement, both of whom are arrested in Australia. Now, let me ask you, when we talk Civil War, I know that you're more atmospheric story. I don't know how often you actually get down into this person's in command of this unit. Does the name Thomas Francis Marr stick out to you at all?
It sounds very familiar.
Okay.
It sounds familiar. And
you got something?
I was going to say, why? Why does it sound
Why
familiar?
does it sound familiar? So both of these guys, after being sent to Australia, are going to escape, and they're going to contribute significantly to the American Civil War.
Okay.
Just a little more than a decade later, Marr is going to go on to serve in the Union Army, eventually commanding the famed Irish Brigade.
That's it. Yep.
Remember the movie Gods and Generals?
Of course. Who could forget it?
They have that terrible scene where they're
It
asking,
might as well be the bloody English.
they're asking where General Marr is going to be, and they're like, oh, he's in the back. But anyway,
Yeah.
Marr's his own legacy. But Marr is one of the leaders of the Rising of 48, so he's going to go on to serve in the Irish Brigade, while Mitchell, who's going to emigrate to the United States, is a little older. He's going to be in the American South. 3 of his sons will go on and fight in Confederate units.
Wow.
Now, another after effect of the failed uprising of 1848 was the new push to achieve Irish independence through legislative means. So if fighting disconnected and uncoordinated isn't going to do it, maybe we could pass laws in our parliament that will not get any recognition from England. So it's going to take some time, but in 1880, a guy named Charles Stewart Parnell and the Irish Parliamentary Party are going to gain some political prominence. Through their riling up of the tenement farming class, the Irish Land League was able to secure land reforms in favor of the tenants in the form of what is known as the Irish Land Acts. They also made great legislative process to date towards independence. Sorry, they made the greatest legislative progress towards independence to date when they introduced 2 separate bills to grant Ireland a limited autonomy.
Okay.
What do you think happens to these bills? They pass, they make it through the House of Commons? Correct. Both bills will inevitably fail in British Parliament, but the symbolic moment of even having the bills on the floor
Yeah, that's got to be something, right?
would inspire multiple grassroots movements to control national affairs through the Local Government Act of 1898, which effectively ended landlord control of the local government in Ireland. So very small gains, huge symbolic gains. Imagine needing to fill a gas tank. This was a lot of gas just put into the tank towards the fuel you'll need to spend to achieve Irish independence. At the turn of the century, so much momentum had been built for the potential for home rule that in 1911, when the Parliament Act abolished the veto of the House of Lords, it paved the way for the passing of the 1914 Government of Ireland Act, which is also known as the Home Rule Act.
Ah, yes.
So essentially in 1911, they undo the act that said the Irish can't have a parliament. Now the Irish can have a parliament again.
And then they built and they launched an Olympic.
And then 3 years later,
Yeah.
so much momentum has been built that it's like, not only can you have a parliament, but like maybe we'll actually allow you to govern yourselves inside your own borders. You're still ours, but right?
Okay.
So the act was the first law ever approved by the Parliament of the United Kingdom, and that provided for a developed government in any part of the United Kingdom proper, so not just Ireland, as opposed to its colonial territories. So imagine if the United States was still a part of the empire at this point. This would not apply here. This would only apply to what was once previously considered a sovereign nation, Ireland.
Got it.
So not just new colonies.
So I wonder how that works for Wales.
I don't know, something to look into because Welsh history is fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
This whole era's history, because we're speeding through a lot of culture.
We just covered like 500 years.
But like even before this, I mean, England and Ireland, Wales, Scotland, they all exist in this very small tribal pagan existence. And,
sure.
We haven't even talked about the arrival of Christendom and its changing of everything in that area.
We started our story quite some time after that. So it's I hear a rule like that and I'm like, man, I bet Wales would have benefited from that. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Maybe I don't know. Again, I have no idea.
So it's 1914. So we've got this Home Rule Act on the table. Catholic Ireland and Protestant Ireland, however, are not going to be on the same page as far as the lines of how home rule would be drawn.
Okay.
And how much power would be granted to either of these parties. Now, the Unionist movement, which had been growing since 1886 among Irish Protestants after the introduction of the first Home Rule Bill, remember the failed symbolic bills, feared discrimination and loss of economic and social privileges if Irish Catholics, there's that line again, were to achieve what they considered real political power. Under the leadership of the Dublin-born Sir Edward Carson of the Irish Unionist Party and the Ulsterman, Sir James Craig of the Ulster Unionist Party, Unionists became strongly militant, forming the Ulster Volunteers in order to, quote, oppose the coercion of Ulster. Basically meaning we don't want Ulster to fall into the Catholic hands. After the Home Rule Bill passed in May of 1914, to avoid a potential rebellion happening in Ulster between Irish and Catholics, the British Prime Minister H.H. Asquith introduced an amending bill reluctantly going to be conceded to by the Irish Party leadership, which basically provided for the temporary exclusion of Ulster from the workings of this Home Rule Bill for a trial period of 6 years, with an as yet undecided set of measures to be introduced for the area to be temporarily excluded. Essentially, England recognizes that there is a huge portion of Protestants in this section of Ireland that don't actually want this. They would like things to continue the way they are, and there's a pot about to boil over between the people that want to break away and have some home rule and not. So to kind of try to tone this down,
turn the heat down.
They basically taken Ulster and been like, except for you guys, everything here, just pause. We're going to work that out. Now, on November 25th, 1913, so peeling back a little bit, the Irish Volunteers had been formed by Owen McNeill in response to the paramilitary Ulster Volunteer Force that had been founded earlier in the year to fight against Home Rule. Also in 1913, the Irish Citizen Army was founded by the trade unionists and socialists such as James Larkins and James Connolly, following a series of violent incidents between the trade unionists and the Dublin police in the Dublin lockout. However, back to 1914.
1914?
Yes.
Huh. I think there was some event that I heard of.
That's right. With the prospects of war looming, in June of 1914, nationalist leader John Redmond forced the Volunteers to give his nominees a majority on the ruling committee. When war eventually did break out, later in September of 1914, Redmond would encourage the Irish Volunteers to enlist in the British Army. A faction led by Owen McNeill broke with the Redmondites, who became known as the National Volunteers, and they remained in Ireland to fight for... they remained in Ireland rather than fighting with the British in the what will become the Western Front. Many of the National Volunteers, however, do enlist, and the majority of the men in the 16th Division of the British Army had formerly actually served in these National Volunteer units, so they're known as the 16th Irish Division. Now, with a new focus on the front lines, the implementations of both the Home Rule Act and the equally controversial Welsh Church Act of 1914 were formally postponed for a minimum of 12 months. The pause on the implementation of the act actually served to quell tensions and potentially avoid an Irish civil war. So we were concerned this was going to happen, so Ulster got that temporary exclusion. Well, having to focus on the outbreak of what we now call World War I kind of takes all the heat. Yeah, it takes all the heat off this so that everybody can kind of be like, well, what the hell is happening in France right now?
Right. So
and
in a
Belgium.
weird way, this war really did unite them.
In a weird... I wouldn't say unite, but I would say its outbreak everybody kind of agreed, let's pay attention to that for a moment.
Common enemies, right?
But
They
I
do
don't
have a way
know.
of-
So again, but I don't like that analogy works, but I don't know if it's directly
Okay,
accurate because
I
they're not really enemies. There's just kind of this like, that is a significant enough event that we should pay attention for a moment
that makes sense.
before we figure out what happens
That
here
makes
next. So as the size of the British Expeditionary Force grew exponentially, Irish Catholics are going to see an opportunity to ensure the implementation of the Home Rule Act at the end of the war through Ireland's participation in the war. So essentially the Catholics are like, all right, with the war being on, if we do our part, this will help the momentum towards achieving what we're trying to achieve, which is the implementation of this Home Rule Act, which will empower Catholics to have more of a voice. On the other side of that, the Irish National Volunteers, who supported the UK and remaining with England, saw it as an opportunity to gain support for limiting the prospects of Catholic influence and power. So more than 175,000 Irishmen are going to join the swelling ranks, with Catholics largely joining the Irish regiments of the 10th and 16th Divisions of the new British Army, with Protestants joining the 36th Divisions. So essentially the 16th and the 10th divisions go by the names the Irish Divisions, and the 36th is known as the Ulster Division. Now, the continuation of the war beyond 1915 and subsequent developments in Ireland resulted in further postponements of the implementation of this Home Rule Act, meaning that the act never comes into effect. And while this is happening, you got, famously a lot of the Irish troops go to the Gallipoli campaign. They end up fighting a lot of Turkish opposition, the Ottomans there. If you listen to a bunch of Irish World War I music, Come Out Ye Black and Tans, things like that, they talk about fighting at places such as Suvla Bay or Sud El Bar. So while the Irish are inevitably all over the Western Front, a lot of the early World War I fighting for them comes in places like against the Ottoman Empire. In the meantime, while the war is going on, it wasn't as if they had just paused the desire to throw off English rule in Ireland. And so those
Forgot about that.
Yeah, and so those who outright refused to support England in the World War altogether, they combined with the Irish Citizen Army, and they formed what is known as the Irish Republican Army. And they launched an armed insurrection.
Wait, I think I've heard of those guys.
Yes, up the raw. But what happens is, a story we told last year on the show, this newly formed Irish Republican Army and small provisional government is going to launch the 1916 Easter Rising. So we talked about, having this backdrop of World War I. Well, one of the most poignant scenes of the Easter Rising is the British just laying to waste the GPO, the General Post Office there, and having the street lined with all these British Tommies that you would see on the Western Front, these huge guns, these cannons just raining shells down. It looks very much like a World War I story happening in the middle of a nice, prim and proper European street. Well, that's kind of exactly what it is. The war has been happening. Troops have come home from, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman campaigns, the Gallipoli campaign, things like that. And combined with the forces that are naturally there for policing, you suddenly had this huge British military presence. And when this rising that is very disconnected happens, you see an overwhelming British military response to it.
And what year was the IRA formed?
1916.
16?
All right. So April 24th, 1916, April 23rd, the Easter Rising, will kick off with the proclaiming of the Irish Republic through the reading of the Declaration of Independence. Sounds familiar. We kind of did one of the same things. When we decided to declare our independence, we were like, let's read it to everybody first. Yeah. However, like its predecessor uprisings, after a week of heavy fighting, most of which is occurring in Dublin, a very disconnected attempt at throwing off British rule will fail. Again, we said, this happened in 1798. It happened again in 1848, again in 98. Well, guess what? Here we are in 1916, and literally they had this massive mobilization ready to go, fight the British, and then they said, psych, just kidding, cancel it. And then, later that same day, they were like, just kidding, it's back on, but we didn't tell everybody. So it was a disaster from the start. So eventually, what you end up having is surviving rebels. They're forced to surrender their position, the majority of whom are going to be imprisoned, with 15 of the prisoners, mostly leadership, set to be executed as traitors to the United Kingdom. And this is going to include names like Patrick Pearse, who was the spokesman for the Rising.
Not a Patrick McGuire this time.
No, Patrick Pearse, a finer gentleman.
Oh, okay.
And he, again, spokesman for the Rising, and he's the one that actually provides the signal to, like, let's get going.
Okay.
As well as James Connolly, who we heard that Derek Warfield and the Wolfe Tones poem at the beginning of this song, you know, about his execution. And again, he was a socialist and founder of the Industrial Workers of the World Union, and both of the Irish and Scottish labor movements. We didn't forget about you, Colm. Now, these events, together with the conscription crisis of 1918, had a profound effect on changing public opinion in Ireland against the British government. So, a couple things on that. One, if you want a more detailed rundown of the Easter Rising, go back to last season, listen to Anthony Trusso's episode from season 5. And 2, just kind of take away that while the Irish have seemingly failed several times along the way to throw off English rule, you can call it, you know, a justification, you know, whatever you need to do in the aftermath. But to me, the way I interpret all these is, yes, they are momentary and individual failures, but they are all progress towards what inevitably does work out in favor. Like, you can't get to the final result without any of these failed things. So, again, asking that question, what is success? What is failure? Because tactically one thing, objectively another thing. And that's kind of what the Rising of 16 is. It's a tactical failure, but it really gets the mojo going for our story.
Successful failure, like Apollo 13.
Apollo 13,
yeah.
Right. Thomas Ashe, one of the volunteer leaders in prison for his role in the Rising of 16, he dies on a hunger strike after the British attempted to force feed him in 1917. So imagine that.
Well, I mean, have you tried English food? I mean, sorry. So.
Don't rip on beans and toast. Beans and toast is great. So the years between the Rising of 16 and the beginning of the War of Independence in 1919 are not going to be entirely bloodless. In 1918, during disturbances arising out of anti-conscription campaigns, 6 civilians are going to die in confrontations with the police and British Army, and then more than 1,000 people are going to be arrested. So essentially in 1918, the British are mandating that Irish men fight in the war. So there's a great song called Man Behind the Wire, and essentially they talk about armored cars and tanks and guns came to take away our sons, but everyone needs to stand behind the men behind the wire. Like, this isn't their choice. They shouldn't be doing it, but they're there, and so we'll stand behind them. It's kind of how, like, you know, you can feel about certain things. Like, me personally, I'm not really pro-war on any level, but I will always support the war fighter. You know,
sure.
no matter what the political or whatever justifications for the war are, the people who are quite literally living in that shit,
yeah,
a lot of that's irrelevant to them. So for me,
sure.
I support, you know, their efforts. So that's kind of what that theme of that song at least is about. Now, there were raids for arms by the volunteers, so it's not like when the Irish, you know, start these campaigns, they're always well armed, or they have these, you know, access to armories and things like that. A lot of these small raids need to happen just because they need to take the weapons off the guys so they can then do bigger things. Yeah. So, you know, you'll see a lot of the beginnings of this movement are mainly just to equip themselves. But this is really when the wheels start to come off the bus, because 2 Kerry volunteers, John Brown and Robert Lading, are going to be shot and killed on April 16th, 1918, during a raid on the police barracks in Gortaclay.
Is John Brown going to be the meteor of this war, too?
Oh, my God. I didn't even realize that when I was writing this.
Wow.
It is him again. Now, these men are the first volunteers to be killed during a raid for arms. And there's going to be one other shooting of a Royal Irish Constabulary, again, a policeman, and the burning of an RIC barracks in County Kerry. So these attacks, Parker, in the spring are going to have a tremendous British military response. It's going to briefly quell the violence, but not entirely, and the raids are going to ratchet up again as the Irish Republican Army looks to seize arms and ammunition. However, still not a lot of coordinated stuff happening here, and so you're seeing a lot of randomness to the acts of violence, which both makes it hard to be efficient and successful for the IRA,
right,
and also makes it hard to kind of defend and predict for the British forces on the island. So in early July 1918, Irish volunteers are going to ambush 2 RIC men that had been stationed on a country road between Ballingarry and Ballyvorney, essentially to stop activity out that way in what is going to be known as the first of the ambushes or attacks on RIC since the Easter Rising. So all the stuff I had just mentioned comes right after these 2 guys are killed. One of the RIC soldiers is going to be shot in the neck. The other is going to be beaten, and police carbines and ammunition are going to be seized. So you can see that getting started. Patrols in Bantry and Ballinvorney were beaten badly in September and October again. In November of 1918, Armistice Day.
Ooh.
Ready for this? Armistice Day. What do you think everybody's doing in London, in Paris, in New York City?
They're celebrating, they're toasting.
Partying their asses off.
Yeah.
You know the short story how we partied early in the United States?
How?
So I think it's on November 7th. There's a false armistice. Basically, we already know it's coming, but news that it's all official has reached the U.S. on November 7th.
Willie
So
the Deuce, he abdicates on the 9th. So maybe is it before that?
it's before that.
It's before
I'm
that?
pretty sure it's before. I think it's the 7th. But there's a bunch of very famous photographs of like ticker tape and just New York City just going nuts. They're throwing
Sure,
stuff.
okay.
But it's not actually on Armistice Day.
It's
4 days early.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
So while everybody's basically partying their ass off from an Allied perspective on Armistice Day 1918, in Dublin, they're having a severe riot. An absolute riot has kicked off, and over 100 British soldiers are going to be injured as a result at the end of the day of November 11th.
Did they see the party as kind of a diversionary tactic, or were they legitimately sad that the war was over for some reason?
I think there's 2 things happening there. One is, yes, seizing on distraction, seizing on opportunity, and 2, the Irish have been focused on the Irish. I mean, that's one of the things that I found very interesting was while they are connected to what's happening in London and England and happening with the British Army and the war as a whole, they're also like, yeah, great, but here in Ireland, and they're very focused on what they're doing.
Got it.
So there is as much potential for taking advantage of the moment as well as being like, it just happened on the same day because we were already doing our thing.
Okay.
So in January of 1919, after a December 1918 general election of 105, I guess I should say, out of 105 seats of parliament that were up for grabs, 73 of them are going to be won by a group known as Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, or We Ourselves, is the name of an Irish political party founded in 1905 by Arthur Griffith. In the early 20th century, it became a major focus for various forms of Irish nationalism, especially Irish republicanism. And after the Easter Rising in 1916, Sinn Féin grew in membership and as a result was organized at its annual party conference, or Ardèche, in 1917. It should be said that most of these members of parliament were elected because they ran on a platform of abstentionism from the British House of Commons. Essentially, we are going to refuse to participate in British politics. British politics are irrelevant to a sovereign Ireland.
Got it.
So that's kind of like they ran on that. We are going to ignore, I don't know if it's an actual quote or not, but in the movie Michael Collins, our only weapon is refusal. It's kind of this thing. They can just refuse the British.
Underrated Apollo astronaut.
I knew you were going to do that. You're contractually obligated.
Yeah,
to do that.
we need a jar on the table where I could just every time I say that about Michael Collins, I just put in like $1 in the jar.
What if we start with an initial investment of $100 to backdate all the times we've done that over 5 seasons?
Yeah,
of the show?
I'm giving up. I'm giving up good jokes for Lent.
That's funny. All right, so in January 1919, the Irish Parliament is going to set up something known as Dáil Éireann, which is essentially the early form of the Irish government. The Dáil still exists today, kind of like Congress and Senate exist in a greater Irish government. But this first Dáil issued a new Declaration of Independence in 1919, and they officially proclaim an Irish Republic.
I like the earlier work better. The later stuff.
So the first Dáil is going to issue a new Declaration of Independence when they proclaim the Irish Republic. And this is mainly a restatement of the 1916 proclamation of the Republic. But what they've done differently, and perhaps most importantly, is the additional provision which is actually spelling out that Ireland will not remain a part of the United Kingdom. So,
Got it.
where it was kind of implied in 1916 and 1919, they're just saying it.
Yeah.
So the Irish Republic's Ministry of Dáil Éireann they're going to press the English further by sending a delegation under the Can Corlaw, or somebody who essentially serves as the head of council or speaker of the Dáil, a guy named Sean T. O'Kelly, to the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. But he's not going to be admitted. So it's one of those things, right, where kind of like the bills of the 1880s where the presence matters. You know, you would, perfect world, they would have loved those home rule bills to pass in the 1880s, but the fact that they were on the floor, big deal. Here we are in 1919. They have a representative there. The English are really playing the game, not really recognizing them, but other nations are seeing them.
Okay.
And that's going to be kind of the long play is like, okay, so while this guy is officially not a part of anything, they start to ask the questions why.
How were, and I asked this question for a specific reason, to kind of the wheelhouse that we might be a little bit more familiar with. For example, the Confederacy and the American Civil War. The Confederacy was seeking approval from other, seeking recognition, I should say, from other political entities, other countries, and thereby kind of giving themselves national identity, right? Independent identity.
Yeah, they want international recognition.
Right. So in that same vein, what were, we talked about France a little bit ago. What were other countries that were not United Kingdom allies or not allies, but constituents? What were other countries' opinion of Ireland at this time? Like, were other countries going, hey, England, you might want to lay up a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way to answer that in 1919 is there is a disconnect between, and not like an out-of-touch disconnect, but like a general population and a government might feel differently about the question you just asked. So
okay.
Relative to the United States, you got to ask yourself this. World War I just ended. Who are the three big players for the Allies?
United States, England, France.
Okay, so they're all friends right now. So you're not going to really mess with your allies too much, especially at this critical post-war period. However, Eamon de Valera, who's he's the Irish provisional president. He is one of the leaders of the Rising of 16. He is imprisoned. He does escape. He does flee to America for a while. He raises $5 million from Irish Americans over there to support this effort. So there is, especially among the Irish population in America, there's a huge support to basically get rid of English rule and things like that. And you'll see that in the working class, especially because by the time of the early 20th century, the modern America has started to be born. So that whole, we beat the English type of thing, right? So there's an affinity, there's a sympathy for other people who are attempting to do, quote unquote, what we and only we have ever done.
So I was just wondering how that kind of like you, and I'm glad you said that because
remember, in France, right, very Catholic, so very sympathetic Catholic sufferings everywhere.
Exactly.
So it's a very interesting moment.
So it is very interesting, and that's
it's a great question.
Like you said, the people feel one way, but the governments feel different. So the U.S. I guess I want to tie that into the you mentioned just before this, like the Irish at the end of the 1800s, they were moving predominantly, shall we say, to the United States, to a country that didn't treat them well.
No.
The populace was definitely against them. However, as bad as we were treating them, England was treating them that much worse. And I think that's I just think that,
and so here's
goes
the
without
other
saying maybe, but
here's the other part of why this is a good question and what people might not be thinking about when they think about this question. World War I has a lot of themes to it. It's not just trenches, mud, and blood, right? World War I, just like World War II, is hugely defined by its propaganda machines. So one of the lasting effects of how propaganda worked during that time is there are people out there that still refer to the 1918 flu as the Spanish flu.
Yes.
Well, that basically short story on that is it's called the Spanish flu because everybody else is having it, but during wartime, censorship is running rampant through everybody involved in the war. And so what they're not doing is giving out these devastating statistical updates of people dying in the trenches, dying at home because of this. And because Spain wasn't involved in the war, they're the only people that were publishing their flu casualty numbers remotely honestly. So it appeared that this was centered and epicentered and originated from Spain, even though it was happening everywhere.
Yeah.
So that same propaganda machine that has limited and controlled what information makes it to places has also largely kept a lot of this British persecution, not necessarily under wraps, but out of every headline on every paper in the world, right? So it's like one of those things that it's not like a secret, but it's not in your face every day. So Sean T. O'Kelly, he's gone to this peace conference. He is there, not intentionally symbolically, but because he's not admitted, it turns into a symbolic presence there. And this is where the story is really going to sort of begin. Because on the very same day that the new Irish Declaration was being issued and read aloud, January 21st, 1919, two RIC officers, again, Royal Irish Constabulary, you'll hear the RIC reference a lot, Constables James MacDonald and Patrick O'Connell were killed in what became known as the Solo Headbeg ambush, just outside County Tipperary by IRA volunteers who were acting largely of their own volition. Again, theme of kind of disconnected, and the overall mission is this, the overall tactic is that, but it's not like there's a central command making everything happen just yet. So the Solo Headbeg ambush has happened, and the match has just been put to the powder. Now, what is the RIC? The RIC is a quasi-military police force that was in Ireland from 1822 to 1922. So a nice little clean, perfectly operated century there, right?
All right.
Very tumultuous century, actually. Unlike other police elsewhere in the United Kingdom, RIC constables are actually routinely armed, including with military-grade weapons, including rifles and carbines, and they are going to be billeted in barracks that were organized in a very militaristic structure. So, again, quasi-military force is a very apt term. Think less street cop and more like National Guard cop. Now,
We're history cops.
Or history cops. McDonnell and O'Connell are going to be transporting explosives when they're attacked by Sean Tracy, Seamus Robinson, Sean Hogan, and Dan Breen. And Dan Breen has actually given us a quote where he recalls the assassination, saying, quote, "We took the action deliberately, having thought over the matter and talked it over between us. Tracy had stated to me that the only way of starting a war was to kill someone, and we wanted to start a war. So we intended to kill some of the police whom we looked upon as the foremost and most important branch of the enemy forces. The only regret that we had following the ambush was that there were only 2 policemen in it instead of the 6 we had expected."
Wow. All right.
So from here, things are going to devolve.
Yeah, you think?
The British government, in response, is going to declare South Tipperary a special military area under the Defence of the Realm Act just 2 days later. And the country is going to be flooded with forces of RIC Constabulary, Royal Irish Constabulary, in an attempt to maintain, quote, order. Now, the 1914 Act was a wartime piece of legislation that gave the British government wide-ranging powers, such as the power to requisition buildings or land needed for the war effort and to make regulations creating criminal offenses. Essentially, in a declared special military area, the British could make up the rules as they go along. What are the whose line is it anyway rules, Parker?
Well, the rules are made up and the points don't matter.
Right. So essentially that's the world the British are living in. They declare an area and they can just kind of do what they want. And they can enforce a complete lockdown without declaring a martial law. So this is the real point, this sentence right here. Imagine martial law without the declaration of martial law. That's what a special military area is.
Okay.
So setting up the stage a bit now. The heart of British power in Ireland was the Dublin Castle administration, often known to the Irish as just the Castle. The head of the Castle administration was the Lord Lieutenant, to whom a chief secretary would be responsible. So Ireland is going to be divided into 3 military districts during the war. 2 of the British Army divisions, the 5th and the 6th divisions, are going to be based in Ireland during this time. Their headquarters are going to be respectively in Curragh and in Cork. And 2 divisions, a lot of troops, but as the course of the War of Independence will go on, eventually British forces are going to swell to over 50,000 troops being based in Ireland. And just for contrast real quick, at the same time, there are only 14,000 troops stationed in metropolitan Britain. So nearly 3 times the amount of troops in actual Britain are actually stationed in Ireland proper. Now, while the British Army had historically been heavily dependent on Irish recruitment, concern over divided loyalties led to the redeployment from 1919 of all regular Irish regiments to garrisons outside Ireland. So if you were in the British Army, you're an Irishman, and you're in the British Army during the war, and you're still in the Army after the war, if you haven't been demobilized yet, at this time in 1919, they're essentially taking all Irish units and sending them far away into the world. They're getting them just away from this because they don't want to risk defections and seeing the, perhaps placing of a British regiment full of Irish troops and then seeing that regiment either halved or hold, in an allegiance flip to now they're independence fighters. So British forces are really at the time mainly policing forces, even though the British military will get involved. And the 2 main police forces in Ireland at this time were the Royal Irish Constabulary, the RIC, mentioned them a few times, and again, more on them in a bit, and the Dublin Metropolitan Police. Of the 17,000 policemen in Ireland, 513 are eventually going to be killed by the IRA between 1919 and 1921, with an additional 682 being wounded. Of the RIC's senior officers, 60% are going to be Irish Protestants and the rest are Catholic, while 70% of the rank and file of the RIC are actually going to be made up of Irish Catholics, and the remainder being Protestant. The RIC was trained for police work, not for war, and was woefully ill-prepared to take on a counterinsurgency. Until March of 1920, London regarded the current and future unrest in Ireland as primarily an issue for the police and did not regard it as a war. The purpose of the army was to back up the police, and in the course of the war, about a quarter of Ireland was eventually put under martial law, mostly in the province of Munster. And then in the rest of the country, British authority was not deemed sufficiently threatened enough to kind of warrant that. But you can see that initially the army is there to back up the police, but the police keep fumbling the ball, so the military is going to step in and take over.
Okay.
Now, the British are going to create 2 paramilitary forces to supplement the work of the IRC, and they're going to recruit heavily from World War I veterans, and they're going to name one of these groups of the temporary constables known as the Black and Tans. And they're going to name another one known as the Auxiliary Division, and they'll be known shorthand more as the Auxies. So essentially now we've got a police force, we've got the British Army, and the British Army is like, yeah, but we don't want to do things directly yet, so the British Army is raising another quasi-military para-whatever force.
Right.
And this is the infamous Black and Tans, as well as another group which operates very similarly to the Black and Tans, but goes by the name Auxies, the auxiliaries, the Auxies.
Okay. All right.
So despite this initial onset of violence, right, these RIC officers being ambushed, things like that, most of 1919, the activity involving the Irish Republican Army is going to be centered more, again, around the capturing of weaponry, ammunition, and the freeing of political prisoners, Republican prisoners specifically, while the Dáil, or the Irish government, they're going to set about building the sovereignty of the Irish state, especially on the international stage. As such, there are only going to be a limited amount of violent activities that happened during the remainder of 1919. And during this period, much of the nationalist campaign involved popular mobilization and the creation of a Republican state within a state. Again, refusal being the thing. They're just going to start acting like Ireland, whether England likes it or not.
War of attrition kind of thing?
Right. In 1920, British journalist Robert Lind, he's going to write for the Daily News, quote, "So far as the mass of people are concerned, the policy of the day is not an active, but a passive policy. Their policy is not so much to attack the government as it is to ignore it and to build up a new government by its side." So ideas in building the government, they're going to vary immensely from some Republican leaders. President Eamon de Valera, he's going to notably favor a very classic conventional warfare alongside politics to legitimize the new republic in the eyes of the world, while more practically experienced leaders such as the Minister of Finance and Director of Intelligence, Michael Collins, big fella,
yep,
later an astronaut. Not same guy. Not same guy. And
Put
the
a dollar in the jar.
And the broader IRA leadership, they're actually going to oppose these methods, as their belief was that large-scale military tactics and that mentality really had led to the debacle that the 1916 Rising had become. And they actually preferred the implementation of guerrilla tactics while the Dahl did their diplomatic work. So ambushes, raids, things like that. Notably, Arthur Griffin, another one of the leaders of the Dahl, preferred a campaign of civil disobedience rather than an armed struggle. But the struggle for Irish independence would require some of each mind.